A very warm welcome to the students of class 8, and today we are going to start with our lesson Macbeth by William Shakespeare. Now everybody knows that Macbeth is one of the most exquisite plays written by Shakespeare, and we cannot just start it as a story. Alright, so before starting it as starting the aspects of the story or getting to know the story of Macbeth, there are a few things that we need to take into consideration. We need to know about the background. We need to know about Shakespeare's treatment of the story of Macbeth. Okay, so to do that, we are going to discuss a few things. First of all, we are going to discuss what is a tragedy and what is a Shakespearean tragedy. What are the things that Shakespeare does in his tragic works, in his tragic stories. And then we are going to discuss the few aspects of tragedy, which will include the famous, Shakespeare's tragic hero. And then we are going to also discuss the moral idea of Macbeth. What is the moral idea behind Macbeth? Alright, now in Macbeth, from the very first juncture, we will find that there is some sort of a conflict between the good and evil. Okay, so this will bring us to the moral idea of Macbeth. Is everything in Macbeth about good and bad, or it's just morality, or there is some sinister evil that it is discussing about? Alright, so we are going to learn about these things in the story of Macbeth. Now, first things first, let us understand what a tragedy is. Now, tragedy is the noblest form of drama. There are many kinds of dramas that can be read, that have been written, but tragedy is the highest form. It's the noblest form. Okay, it surpasses comedy as well, humorous plays as well, because it does something with your mind. It deals with the human mind. All right. Now, basically, it is a moving story which is ending in death. Obviously, death is something that impacts the human mind. It impacts humans in general, the human mind, the human emotions. So, a moving story which ends in death. So, it is sure to move the readers. It is very different from a comedy. Yes, we know the purpose of a play, whether it's a comedy or a tragedy, is to give some sort of entertainment to the reader, okay, or to the person who's watching it. But the purpose of the comedy, the pleasure given by comedy is different. It is delight, and that of tragedy is different. It is some deep spiritual experience, an experience that will engage your spirit, okay, with yourself and the outer world meaning the cosmic world, the cosmos, the atmosphere, beyond the universe, whatever is there. If there is something else, okay, that spirit that is going to be explored by a tragedy. All right. At the same time, after giving some deep spiritual experience, the tragedy will also ensure that the calm of mind is achieved. Now, what is the calm of mind? It is simply the peace inside. All right, the peace within, that people generally try to find out, or seek to find out the peace within. Tragedy supplies that peace within. Not always. It depends on person to person whether they are able to take it in themselves, but it is sure to move that person to something at least. How does this calm of mind appear? Now, before going through a play, before reading a story, or before watching a movie, we might have a lot of preconceived notions, isn't it? So we might be thinking about this, we might have prejudices, we might have biases, we might think about approach subject in a different light. But doesn't it happen like when you watch a movie or you read a book, suddenly you find yourself completely changed? Maybe your viewpoint is completely altered after you watch the movie or read a book. Same thing happens with a tragedy. Alright, it cleanses your mind. A sort of cleansing happens, a purgation, a curing of the mind happens, of the prejudices, of the biases, of the discriminations that stays in our mind. Okay, so it cleanses, and this process that the readers reach after watching the play, even if the play ends and even if the tragic play, it ends in death, it ends in unhappiness, there is a sort of calm of mind, a peace that comes in the readers, and that is known as catharsis. All right, so you better know this. This is catharsis. It's like a cleansing of the mind, the after effects, which are deep. All right, which has a deep impact, a changing impact, a life-changing impact. So that is catharsis. Now, tragedy is deemed to make the readers achieve catharsis, the purgation of the mind. All right. And what does a tragedy do? It explores man's relation with evil forces in the world or evil forces in nature. That will also be done by a tragedy. How does man get tempted to do something evil? How does evil come in front of? How does evil encourage man to, take itself or take itself up? Okay, or how does man embrace evil? Okay, how evil lures the man into its den, if I am personifying evil that way. So that is going to explore. Now, Shakespeare has, he's dealt with all these issues of the human mind, all right, in all of his plays, whether it is insanity, madness, from different angles, from various point of view, adding in various characters, creating in various characters. So he has approached the human issues of life, okay, from various angles in all of his tragedies, in all of his works mostly, whether it is a comedy or a tragedy or any other sort of, it's a historical play, he has done that in all of his works. So this is one point that is also found in tragedy. Now, tragedy, it definitely gives out the truth, some sort of a truth, but it cannot be seen, it cannot be heard. It has to be emotionally experienced. Your emotions, your feelings, it needs to go along with it. You need to experience that from within. So an emotional experience needs to occur after you've read a tragedy. Obviously, if it is an emotional experience, it's an individual experience, and its purpose is same as religion. Now, what is the purpose of religion? To seek some sort of order, to seek some sort of affirmation into the world, that whatever, to justify, actions from right, or to separate actions from right and wrong, to affirm them. Not negate any viewpoint, but affirm the good ones, the right thing, the righteous things. So even tragedy does the same. It also seeks to answer those questions that are asked in religion. What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of the world? Is this right? All right. So there has to be some sort of an order. What kind of order should people follow? What kind of order should be there? So these questions as asked by religion is also asked in tragedy itself. So the purpose is the same. And obviously, I told you in the online classes as well that there is no such, it's not always a happy ending. No reconciliation occurs like it is in comedy. Reconciliation between people, everybody found each other and people don't get hurt in the end. Okay, but over here, there is some sort of peace found by the character, which is reconciliation with man himself. I will tell you something, that in the deep recesses of our minds, we might also find that there are a lot of things that we struggle with. We are struggling with ourselves. Maybe there is a person who's bad, who's good and not so good inside us, right? That's what I told you. Even Shakespeare had this thought, had this mindset that there is good and bad in every human being. So here, in the same way, at the end of a tragedy, some sort of reconciliation is reached. All right, within the man himself, within the person himself. So further, we are going to discuss the tragedy. These were the basic aspects of it while defining it. And further, we're going to discuss more about tragedy when we will, under these subheads. So first, we will discuss about the tragic hero. Okay, the main person in the tragedy, right? The tragic hero who is essentially tragic, okay? Who has a downfall, who has this Hubris, who is taken up by Hubris, and Hamartia follows. I've already explained all these terms to you, right? And then you have the tragic action, the action that is abound in tragedy, the plot of it, the execution of the plot abound in tragedy, abound in all these wrongful events that the hero does. Why is he tragic? Because death occurs to him, and the tragic appeal of it, and everything else that is presented to you is tragic. So these are the three things that will help you understand the tragedy better. So now we are going to discuss more about the tragedy in terms of the tragic hero, the tragic action, and the tragic appeal of Shakespeare's tragic plays. Now the tragic hero. Now the tragic hero is just a tale of a character of who is abound in suffering, who has a lot of suffering in his life. And this is basically a story of suffering of a man who is in a high position and whose life ends in death, whose culminates in death, and not just a normal death, a tragic death. Now, the suffering over here, it's not completely unexpected, okay? It's kind of unexpected. It's kind of unexpected by the hero, but we readers know that these are the consequences of his own choices. So the suffering is somewhat unexpected by the tragic hero or the character himself, but it is not something supernatural, just like in the other kind of tragedies, not Shakespearean tragedy, but where it is not something supernatural, not bestowed on him. It is a sort of end, a death, a fatal blow that is brought about by his own actions. This is where he falls from glory. He used to have, he had a glorious life. Like in Macbeth we see, he is known as Bellona's bridegroom, and he's been bestowed upon with so many titles. He had this glory, but he falls from that glory when he conjures up to murder King Duncan, when he plans to execute King Duncan. And this falling from the glory is something very innate in that character, innate in the tragic hero, and that is known as a tragical flaw, some sort of imperfection that is present in the character. This tragical flaw in dramatic language is known as hubris, this ego that brings about a fatal death, or hamartia. So which is a fatal blow that has come about by the tragical flaw in the character. Okay, so and this brings about his own suffering. His actions, it brings about his own suffering, and the suffering is because of his own actions. All right, so this is the tragic hero in Shakespeare. The tragedy is not God-gifted, it's not a divine intervention, it's not something that the supernatural brings about in his life. It's his choice. He has chosen that. He has chosen to step into temptation, and that is why he is being punished for that. It's his own actions. It's not that God who's punishing him. That is the consequence of his own actions. That is the consequence of sin, which is death. All right. So, and in that, destiny somewhat also creates it's also a factor in the, people would definitely argue that, it's not the character, it's not his own actions, but fate has something to play, fate has a role to play. But no, it is not so. Fate is the man, the character himself is the creator of his own fate, is the creator of his own destiny. And how has he brought it about? He has gone to such an extent that his actions cannot be undone. And Macbeth himself, in the entire story, at the end of the story, he says, what is done cannot be undone. When he commits this murder, after that, as a consequence, there are, to cover that up, or to, just to keep himself in that position, he commits more crimes. And that is where he says, what is done cannot be undone. And in a way, he is the creator of his own destiny. So there we can say destiny is just a part of his character as well. He brings about his own destiny. He brings about his own fate. He creates his own fate, master of his own fate. Be it tragic, doesn't matter. He is the tragic hero of Shakespeare's, one of Shakespeare's greatest tragic heroes. The second thing that will help us to understand tragedy better is the tragic action. The tragic action of the play, how the plot is so tragic. Now in the plot there is some sort of a conflict between two entities. It can be between two persons. It is some sort of a struggle, all right, that generally brings about a disaster, which is also known as a catastrophe. Okay, catastrophic, which means everything is in a mess, in a chaos. It ends in chaos. Okay. But what we understand is character in Shakespeare's tragedy, in Shakespeare's plays, is more important than the action, more important than the plot. But what we can argue is that actions are the source of a person's character. It deems character, isn't it? So it is the outcome. Whatever the hero goes through, whatever the actions are, what that brings about the character in the person, what he says, what he does. That decides the character of the person. So I will definitely say character is important, yes, but it is not very different. It is not separated from the action, all right. It is the conflict over there, the struggles that the person faces. He acts out of it. Those are the outcomes. His actions are the outcomes of those struggles. Okay. So the disaster is brought about not by the character only, but by his actions, definitely. Okay. So, but these the conflict or the actions that he does because of his tragical flaw in his character that he does is but voluntary, because he does that by himself. He chooses. But in a tragedy, there is some sort of involuntary action involved as well. And that can be a case of insanity, some abnormal qualities of the mind, where Macbeth becomes so mad with power. And Lady Macbeth's lust for revenge, lust for power, it completely changes their life. It destroys their lives. Then you have the supernatural, the involvement of the supernatural beings, the witches. They act as a catalyst to ignite these emotions in Macbeth's mind to become the king. These ambitions to become a king. All right, they make Macbeth more ambitious. They make Macbeth, come to terms with his ambitions. And then you have chance. Okay, so by chance or by accident, there are a lot of things happening. So these are also the involuntary involvements, involuntary actions that occur in the non-voluntary actions that bring about the catastrophe or disaster. That also calls for that can also be termed along with the tragic action, which is a part of it, the tragic action of the play, okay, or of the story here. And now coming, if we have to talk about the conflict, now there is a sort of conflict. There are two kinds of conflict that we can find in the story. One is the inner conflict. Basically, this is what of a tragedy, not only the story of Macbeth, but also if you consider the story of Hamlet, who is the most tragic character of Shakespeare's, of the world of Shakespeare, of Shakespeare's tragedies, the most tragic character, even more than Macbeth. Okay. There is the conflict. There are two kinds of conflict. One is the outward conflict, which is basically the person trying to fight the other people, the outer forces of nature. Okay, there might be calamities, there might be people he was fighting with. All right, these are the outer conflicts. Over here, and the second kind of conflict is the inner conflict, which is in the minds of the man himself. Like Hamlet says, to be or not to be, that is the question. He continuously, is in some sort of, he asks himself, he questions himself. Alright, he's in a conflict in his own mind, whether to do this thing or not. It is just a fight of the impulses and desires that is there in the mind of a man. In Macbeth, he also is a victim of this sort of a conflict. How? Whether to go about with this. Remember, I was talking about the principles today in the online classes, Macbeth's principles, how Lady Macbeth has analyzed her husband's character, that his principles might come in the way. So these principles, he continuously, before committing the act of killing Duncan, he continuously asks himself whether to do this or not. There's this inner conflict, whether this is the right thing to do or not. So that also is a part of the tragic action of the play. And the third one that we can discuss over here is the tragic appeal of these tragedies. How in whole, overall, how does it appeal to the audience? Obviously, how does it play with our, with our emotions? How does it aid to, us into going into a deeper spiritual experience? So obviously the audience sympathizes with the tragic character, the tragic hero. But why? Why do we sympathize with this tragic hero? We don't empathize. We don't want to be in his place, but we sympathize. We are filled with pity and terror. Terror regarding the actions that he has committed. Okay, so because the audience feels that this person, this character is very efficient, the tragic hero. We thought Macbeth to be really efficient. So he was a great leader, he was a warrior, he was a great warrior, and he could have been a greater man, but he did not choose to be that. He gave in to his own weakness. So the tragical flaw in his character is brought about, that ego, that ambition is brought about to become the king, to rule, the lust for power. This is a weakness. More than evil, it is a weakness in the human being. So that is brought about, and this is why we feel pity and we feel sympathized with the character, because he falls from his glory. So that is his weakness. But the tension in the entire story is somehow lowered. What Shakespeare does, he lowers the tension because he wants the cleansing to just work its way into the hearts of the people, minds of his audience. So the tension is lowered in order to bring some relief, to encourage that cathartic effect on us, on the audience. So that is why the tension is lowered. After King Duncan is murdered, there is somewhat, there are the subplot that comes in between, the other things that come in between. It doesn't take away the tragical appeal of the play, appeal of the story. If more dramatic things occur one after the other, somehow the main story, the main idea gets lost. So what happens? There is this sort of a balance in Shakespeare's story when he lowers the tension. It helps out in bringing about the relief, that calm of mind towards the end of the play in the audience. Now, the tragedies are, in its tragic appeal, it differs in opinions. What opinions? Regarding the norms of society or beliefs in faith. It constantly argues whether this is right or that is wrong. So, it's like a dissent against the norms of society, of beliefs and faith. What they are following. Even Macbeth does so in his the killing of Duncan. Is it supposed to be rewarded? Is it a right thing to do? Is it a justification? And not only King Duncan, he kills Banquo, his dear friend. So that talks about his evil desires. How has he given into how he differs in his opinions regarding what the society should have been, how the norm or the standard behavior should have been. He differs from that. So the tragedies, they argue with that aspect as well. Then you have the poetic justice in the play that also calls for some tragic appeal, that also gives out some tragic appeal, okay, which is tragic. Why is it tragic? Now, Shakespeare, he tells what his message in his tragedies and also in Macbeth is, man must remain human. He shall not try to become, or he dare not become like God. He must not be the creator of his own destiny. He should not try to alter his fate. Yet, Macbeth does so. He does something. He takes the half-truth from the witches. He doesn't go by what is supposed to occur in his life. He alters his own fate. So he doesn't want to remain human. And what happens? He is perished. Evil is perished in the end. And that is the catharsis we achieve. Why? Because, poetic justice, the audience might feel that whatever has happened for the good. Evil is punished. But you know what is tragic? It's not that the evil is punished and that is tragic. No. It is tragic because with the evil, the innocent is also punished. The innocent also suffers. The innocent people. Now, just like Banquo was innocent. I don't know about Duncan. I cannot vouch for him. But I can vouch for Banquo. He was innocent. There were innocent children who were murdered. When Macduff, one of the nobles in Duncan's train of people, his brigade. He flees from the scene. He flees after Duncan is murdered. Macbeth goes off and murders his wife and children. He murders the innocent people, the innocent ones. So the innocent also suffers. So this is real, that is really tragic, because evil is perished and along with it, the good also goes down. That is innately tragic. So what we understand, that tragedy is not just an experience of only evil. Yes, we're talking about good and evil. It's not only the experience of evil, but the good along with it. We experience the evil, but we also experience the good. Now, if only we would have experienced evil, that would have meant something else. We would have been transformed into something else. But no, we experience the good as well. That's why we have our faith in the ending of the story. It is also exploring, it is also an experience of the good in evil. If people are evil, what the good is there in them? And we really acknowledge it. We acknowledge the good in evil, and also good beyond evil. Beyond evil, if there is something good more than what is shown as evil. Maybe somebody else, maybe a divine power or something. So this is what a tragedy does to you. So we've discussed Shakespeare's tragic hero, the most important aspect in a tragedy, and also we've discussed some of the aspects of tragedy previously, and we've discussed the tragic action and the tragic appeal. And also we got an insight into the moral idea behind Macbeth. So thank you children for watching this video, and we shall discuss more about the themes in the story of Macbeth in the next video. Thank you.